It was a quiet, moonless night when Lucy moved into her new apartment. It wasn't much, a small old studio on the edge of town, but the rent was cheap and it was close to work. There was only one thing that struck her as odd: a large, antique mirror bolted to the wall in the living room. Its frame was intricately carved with strange symbols, and no matter how hard she tried, it wouldn't budge. Lucy shrugged it off, telling herself it added character to the otherwise plain space, but strange things began happening almost immediately. The first night she noticed it. Her reflection wasn't quite right. At first she thought it was just her imagination. Maybe the dim lighting or the warped glass made her reflection seem off, but as the days passed she grew more uneasy. Every time she looked into the mirror, her reflection seemed slower, like it was lagging behind her movements by just a fraction of a second. And then one night, it happened. Lucy was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, tired after a long day. She turned to head to bed, but her reflection didn't. It stayed still for a moment, staring back at her with unblinking eyes before slowly mimicking her movement. She froze, heart pounding, unable to believe what she had just seen. She shook it off, convincing herself it was just stress. But deep down, she knew something was wrong with that mirror. The following nights, things got worse. Sometimes when she passed by the mirror, her reflection would just stare at her, even when she wasn't looking directly at it. It felt alive, and it wasn't just her imagination anymore. One evening, Lucy heard a faint tapping sound coming from the mirror. She leaned in closer, her breath fogging the glass. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic, like someone or something was on the other side trying to get out. She backed away, her blood running cold. Panicked, she tried to cover the mirror with a sheet, but the moment she turned around, the sheet fell to the floor as if something had ripped it off. She was paralyzed with fear, staring at her reflection, or what she thought was her reflection. The figure in the mirror smiled, a sinister, twisted grin that didn't match the expression on Lucy's face. Her reflection raised its hand, fingers curling unnaturally as if beckoning her closer. Against her will, Lucy felt herself drawn to the mirror. "No," she whispered, backing away, but her body seemed to move on its own. The reflection leaned closer to the glass, its eyes glinting with malevolence. It mouthed something, 3 words, but Lucy couldn't understand. Suddenly there was a loud crash. The mirror shattered, shards of glass flying everywhere. Lucy screamed, shielding her face. When she dared to open her eyes, the room was still. The mirror was gone, leaving only an empty space on the wall. But something was wrong. Lucy stood up, her legs trembling, and glanced around. Everything looked the same, yet different. The air felt heavier, and the shadows seemed darker, more alive. Then she noticed it. Her reflection was still there, in the broken fragments of the mirror scattered across the floor. It stared up at her, eyes full of malice, smiling that same twisted grin. And it whispered, "I'm free now." Lucy stumbled backward, horrified, as her reflection began to crawl out of the shards, pulling itself into her world. She ran, but there was no escape. The reflection moved faster, reaching out with cold, jagged fingers. The last thing Lucy heard before the world went dark was her own voice, laughing.